Imagine standing at the edge of a vast underground lake, but instead of water, the waves are made of shimmering liquid silver. It's beautiful, it's hypnotic, and if you breathe in the air for too long, your brain will literally begin to melt. This isn't a sci-fi movie. It's a real place on Earth that we are still too afraid to fully explore. We've spent thousands of years trying to find the off switch for death. But in our desperation to live forever, we've often ended up trading our sanity, our bodies, and our very humanity. Today, we're looking at the most extreme ways human experiments backfired, including one ancient horror that is still technically active right now. Our story begins in 246 BC with a 13-year-old boy named Ying Zheng. He didn't just want to be a king, he wanted to be a god. History knows him as Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China. He had everything: power, wealth, and a legacy that would last centuries, but he was terrified. He realized that no matter how many kingdoms he conquered, he couldn't conquer time. He became obsessed with the elixir of life, a mythical potion that would stop his heart from ever failing. He didn't just ask for this, he turned his entire empire into a laboratory. He sent thousands of people into the oceans and mountains to find deathlessness. When they came back empty-handed, his royal alchemists stepped in with a scientific solution. They gave him a bright red mineral called cinnabar. They believed that because it produced liquid mercury, a metal that flowed like water, it held the secret to eternal transformation. The emperor began drinking this liquid metal every single day. Think about that. The man in charge of millions of people was slowly filling his veins with one of the most neurotoxic substances on the planet. As the mercury built up in his system, the first emperor began to lose his mind. He became violently paranoid, hid from his own shadows, and suffered from tremors so bad he could barely hold a cup. In 210 BC, at just 49 years old, the mercury finally won. It didn't grant him eternal life. It gave him an agonizing, confusing end. But here's where the experiment is still happening. Before he died, he built a massive underground palace, guarded by 8,000 terracotta soldiers. According to ancient records, he had his workers create entire rivers and seas of liquid mercury inside his tomb to mimic the map of his empire. For over 2,000 years, that tomb has remained sealed. Why? Because modern soil tests show that the mercury levels around that site are so insanely high, they still exceed safe limits today. The experiment he performed on himself is still bubbling away in the dark, preserving a tomb that is literally too poisonous for us to open. He wanted to rule forever. Instead, he created a toxic wasteland that still warns us about the price of greed. As the centuries passed, the obsession shifted from China to the hidden basements of medieval Europe. This was the era of the alchemists. They weren't just guys in robes. They were the first experimental chemists, and they were all chasing one thing: the Philosopher's Stone. They believed this legendary substance could turn lead into gold and, more importantly, create the elixir of life. But the lab conditions were a nightmare. For 400 years, these men spent their lives in cramped, unventilated rooms, heating up arsenic, lead, and mercury over open flames. They were breathing in toxic fumes every single day, all for a promise that was a lie. Take the case of Paracelsus. He's known today as the father of toxicology because he realized the dose makes the poison. Yet, he couldn't resist the temptation. He experimented on himself constantly, drinking his own chemical concoctions. He died at 48, showing all the classic signs of heavy metal poisoning: memory loss, shaking hands, and kidney failure. This era gave us the phrase "mad as a hatter," because hat makers used mercury to process fur and eventually lost their minds. But the alchemists were the true pioneers of this madness. They were so convinced that life was hidden inside these toxic metals that they ignored their hair falling out, their teeth rotting, and their minds shattering. They were trying to unlock the secret of the universe, but they were actually just documenting the many ways a human body can break down under chemical stress. But don't think for a second that these mad scientist vibes died out with the Middle Ages. In fact, the next stage of human experimentation moved from heavy metals to something much more personal. The blood of the young dot, the idea of living forever, didn't die with the alchemists. It just got a tech upgrade. In the mid-20th century, scientists started looking at something much more biological. Blood, In the 1950s, a researcher named Clive McKay performed a disturbing procedure called parabiosis. He surgically joined an old rat and a young rat together, forcing them to share a single circulatory system. The result? The old rat's muscles and brain began to look younger. The scientific world was stunned, but for decades, no one dared to try this on humans. That changed in Silicon Valley. By 2016, a company called Ambrosia started offering a clinical trial that looked more like something out of a horror movie for $8,000. Wealthy clients could have the veins of teenagers drained of their plasma and pumped directly into their own bodies. It was literally vampirism with a PayPal account. Billionaires were reportedly spending $40,000 a quarter to stay fresh. But here's the dark reality. This wasn't controlled science. There was no real proof it worked in humans, and the risks were massive. Injecting someone else's plasma can cause your lungs to fail or trigger violent immune responses. The FDA eventually had to step in and warn the public that these young blood treatments were potentially dangerous and had zero proven benefits. The company shut down, but the experiment didn't stop. It just rebranded. The obsession with young energy is still a massive, unregulated shadow industry where people trade their safety for a slim hope of turning back the clock. If blood isn't enough, some people are betting on the big freeze. Right now, in a facility in Arizona, there are over 200 people suspended in giant metal tanks of liquid nitrogen. They are chilled to minus 196 degrees Celsius. They aren't technically alive, but their families refuse to say they are dead. They call them patients. This is cryonics. The experiment started in 1967 with a professor named James Bedford. The idea is simple. If medicine today can't fix what killed you, maybe medicine in 200 years can. So, the moment your heart stops, a team rushes in, replaces your blood with a type of medical antifreeze, and dunks you in the deep freeze. But this experiment has a messy, dark side. Take the legend of baseball star Ted Williams. After he passed, reports surfaced that his body was treated with shocking negligences. Head was allegedly separated from his body and stored in a way that would make a horror writer cringe. We have no idea if we can ever unfreeze a human brain without it turning into mush. Every person in those tanks is part of a massive ongoing experiment that might never have an answer. They are waiting in the dark, frozen in time, betting their entire existence on a future that hasn't promised to wake them up, but even the big freeze is too slow for some. The newest, most terrifying experiment is mind uploading. In 2018, a startup made a pitch that sounds like a scam, but people actually signed up for it. The pitch: we will preserve your brain so perfectly that one day you can live forever as a computer program. The catch: the process is 100% fatal. To preserve the brain's complex wiring, they have to pump glass-making chemicals into your arteries while you are still alive. It is essentially high-tech assisted suicide. You have to die to maybe live later as a digital file. Experts call it selling a promise you can't keep. Yet people, including high-profile tech CEOs, have paid to be on the waiting list. They are willing to destroy their physical lives today for a chance at a digital ghost tomorrow. This brings us to the experiment that is still happening right now. It's not just the mercury in the emperor's tomb or the bodies in the nitrogen tanks. It's the experiment on the human psyche. We are currently living in an era where we are more afraid of aging than we are of the risks of unproven science. Whether it's unregulated biohacking, experimental anti-aging drugs, or digital consciousness, the test subjects are everywhere. We've moved from drinking mercury to uploading our minds, but the core problem remains the same. We are so busy trying to cheat death that we are forgetting how to actually live. We are spending billions to fix a problem that is a natural part of being human. The first emperor's tomb is still too toxic to enter. The alchemist's bones are still saturated with poison. And the tech giants of today are still chasing a ghost in a machine. Maybe the real experiment isn't about how to live forever, it's about whether we can ever learn to accept the time we actually have. If you made it this far, you're now part of the conversation. Which of these experiments do you think is the most dangerous? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the dark side of history.